All right, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Meola. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. My pronouns are she, her, hers. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please mute yourselves, especially when other speakers are presenting. If you have a question throughout this morning's session, please send it to the chat box and we'll be sure to answer them later on. And also change your Zoom names to your first and last name with your gender pronoun if you feel comfortable doing so. You can do that simply by clicking the button with the 3 dots on your window with your image on it, and Zoom will let you change your name there. Okay, so from my home office to yours, welcome to the 8th Annual Delaware River Watershed Forum. The last several months have been challenging, to say the least, right? And I do hope that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. From wherever you are joining us from today, I want to begin by acknowledging the original people whose lands are defined by this watershed. And in acknowledging Indigenous people, I also want to recognize that Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. The virus has exacerbated the challenges communities of color are dealing with, higher rates of pre-existing conditions, which are the results of systematic and environmental racism. So now more than ever, the Coalition will advance inclusivity and equity in our activities and within our culture. Racial equity is bigger than our conservation priorities. Acknowledging the 400 years of systemic racism is the first step in learning about ourselves and our own internalized beliefs, as well as discovering how to disrupt the system, which at times could mean having difficult conversations with our families, friends, colleagues, and taking action might make us feel vulnerable. But the key is to embrace that vulnerability and pursue whatever actions need to be taken to make our workplaces and communities equitable and inclusive. I'm so grateful to the many partners of the Coalition for meeting the moment and continuing your equity journey. We have the responsibility within our mission to speak on racial injustices, which is why it's been so necessary to adapt and stay connected. So thank goodness for Zoom, right? So as always, I'm thrilled to have you all together, even if it's virtually. This year's conference takes on new meaning as we continue working toward a protected, cleaner, and more inclusive watershed, even with the several roadblocks in the way. Since we are online this year, we have the opportunity to focus on the headwaters, the New York portion of our watershed, since we have never been able to have an in-person gathering there. There are multiple New York focus sessions throughout the conference that I hope you'll take advantage of. A new field trip has recently been posted. It's all about fly tying. So I urge you to jump on there. It'll be a fun time. And, you know, I also want to mention, although this year has not been what any of us anticipated, to say the least, we still have a lot of accomplishments to celebrate. One of which, the House Appropriations Committee included $10 million in their fiscal year 2021 budget, which was the Coalition's collective ask for the program. So now we wait for Senate negotiations. And thanks to last year's funding for the DRBRP, a total of 37 projects have been awarded grant dollars to conserve and restore fish and wildlife habitat, improve water quality, reduce flood damage, and improve public access. So later this morning, you'll hear much more about the recipients of the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund and the anticipated conservation outcomes. Another win, recent win, in a bipartisan fashion, the Great American Outdoors Act was signed into law. The act permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund at $900 million. So thank you to all those who made that victory happen and for prioritizing the protection of our nation's public lands. And one more win I'll mention, we worked diligently with our watershed states, governor's offices, departments of transportation, and stakeholders, which resulted in the installment of several signs along major roadways in New York and Delaware, indicating that folks are entering the Delaware River watershed. I look forward to working with you all as we continue to advance a protected, healthy watershed, so I can announce several more wins next year, hopefully in person. Actually, we'll mark it in your permanent marker. Our next year's forum is September 30th and October 1st. So, and we'll send out those details as we get closer. We will be in Philly, God willing. So I want to thank all of our sponsors, including the William Penn Foundation, National Parks Conservation Association, and many others for making this week possible. A huge thanks to our Forum Planning Committee, Steering Committee, all of our speakers, and of course, thank you to my rockstar team, Olivia LeWarn, Kelly Knutson, Rita Yelda, and Amy Schofield for all your hard work and dedication. Finally, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us virtually for this forum. I know everyone's weeks are busy and we really appreciate you taking the time out to collaborate with us and network a bit. And without your passion for the watershed, the coalition really would not be as successful as it has been. So thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Eric Stiles, President and CEO of New Jersey Audubon, to this virtual stage and microphone. Eric?
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thanks to everyone coming out today. My name is Eric Stiles. Personal pronouns are he, him, his. On a personal note, over this past spring, while it's clear to me that inviting others to offer their personal pronouns is important, our best friend's child is going through a transition. So it really struck home. And I want to thank the coalition and others that have provided me some of the mentoring that have allowed us to be supportive throughout this process. So what's in a name? Everything. And I think acknowledging some of our important matters, such as personal pronouns, has really hit home to me how important that has been my family with our godchild, who is Luca. So just special shout out to the leadership of CDRW for providing us that kind of thoughtful framing and language and understanding, because it really was one of the most important things, I think, for me personally in this journey. I want to recognize that and thank Eileen Murphy, and who, along with Sue Mayro from Pennsylvania Environment Council, are the co-chairs of the CDRW. Before speaking about this incredible coalition and those that of you, everyone here is what makes the coalition so incredible and makes the work happen. I would be remiss without touching on who we are and where we are as a people, region, as nation. Two touch points come to mind. These are the times that try one's souls. And then Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. So to me, these are two guide points for how we navigate the COVID-19 waters, which have hit our communities, region, and nation hard. The health and economic impacts have been jarring, and the psychological hit, the toll from children to those from the greatest generation, are reeling as the world has gone sideways. Our nation is in the midst of a long overdue racial reckoning. Instead of seeing slavery simply as a dark chapter in our nation's history, we need to embrace the truth offered by Pulitzer Prize winning author Isabel Wilkerson, that the United States has a caste system in which race determines your place within society. Over the next 4 days, it is important to acknowledge the racial injustices befallen on Jacob Blake, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Christian Cooper, and tens and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of others. New Jersey Audubon will continue to work with the coalition, utilizing resources to advance the essential elements of embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, recognizing that what that looks like in your own community may be very different. So what those issues may be in the upper Delaware River Watershed are different than Philadelphia or Camden, than the Delaware Bayshore. Yet it's those differences that unite us, that bring us together as one within this region. It is embracing an inclusive culture that allows us to come together in service to the water, the people, the wildlife, and the habitat. The crisis has had silver lining moments. Communities have come together in ways never deemed possible before this crisis to care for one another. Food banks I mean, it's a shame we need them, but you see food banks exploding, springing up from out of thin air, where faith-based groups, civic organizations, and local governments are coming together to care for one another. We have major utility companies that are making announcements well in advance of our governors about delaying any cessation of services, recognizing that so many of us are reeling from the economic outfall of COVID-19. That being unemployed is not a statement of your self-worth. It's rather, these are the seas in which we all swim. People from all political stripes and races have come together to support Black leaders, demanding equity and justice. Many state political leaders have also cast party affiliation aside in service to their residents. And in times of uncertainty, we turn to nature. People are spending more time outside than ever. Study after study has shown the physical and mental health benefits of spending time in nature. Social capital builds, property values increase, crime rates are reduced in neighborhoods that have safe, welcome, and accessible parks. Academic performance and learning improves when students spend time outside in nature. While the region is densely populated, it is also blessed with many parks and natural areas. From the wild and scenic Delaware River and the headwaters, through our urban gems like Petty's Island and Fairmount Park, down to the largely preserved Delaware Bayshore. People can connect with and find joy, solace, and community in nature, yet the cracks still appear. Access to safe, welcoming natural areas remains a privilege and not a right. Having drinkable, swimmable, and fishable rivers that you can access is not based on chance, but largely income and race. We have seen amazing accomplishments over the past year, which Sandra has highlighted. And this, to me, is the heart and soul of CDRW. We are a values-based coalition. We are seeking to improve the water, habitat, and wildlife for all, regardless of race, culture, religion, sexual orientation, gender, income, citizenship status, or the different ways that in some ways divide us. We have affirmed that that is access to water, wildlife, habitat, should be a fundamental and inalienable right, no different than your right to free speech, your right to religion, or your right to assemble. I want to thank Sandra for the shout out on the amazing accomplishments that we've seen this past year, despite the conditions, or perhaps because of those conditions. So for example, passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, shows that nature, water is our lingua franca. It's the things that we can all enjoy, regardless of our community. And that large bipartisan support in a time that we are so fractured should give us reason for hope and optimism. We are on the right track, pursuing the right things in the right ways. Enjoy this year's forum and keep in mind how we can continue to move forward as one watershed together with all who rely on it for drinking water. And that's a big capital ALL, really stressing that we need to challenge as we look at our own communities and our own mission, who is not at the table, to stress that it is time for some of us, myself as a white male of privilege, to step back and amplify and support other voices. Thanks again to our sponsors, including the William Penn Foundation, for making this event possible. And again, Sandra would kick me if I didn't remind everyone to put in permanent marker on next year's calendar. And hopefully it will be in the city of brotherly love in 2021, September 30th through October 1st at the Logan Hotel. I now turn it back over to Sandra.
Thank you, Eric, so much. For those of you who have joined recently, welcome. I just wanted to remind folks, If you can please change your Zoom name to your first and last name, and also your gender pronouns if you feel comfortable doing so. And you can change your name by clicking the three buttons, the three dots on the top right of your screen, where your video is playing from, and Zoom you'll see rename to do so there. So now I'd like to kick it off to Jeff Skelding, who's going to lead us into our next session. Jeff is the Executive Director of the Friends of the Upper Delaware River. So Jeff, take it away.
Great, thank you, Sandra. As Sandra said, I'm Jeff Skelding. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Upper Delaware River. My personal pronouns are he, him, his. We are thrilled that the coalition has decided to feature the Upper Delaware River and the headwaters of the system. As Sandra mentioned, myself and my staff, Sherry and Molly, and many of our board members often have to travel some distance to get down to the rest of you. So we're glad that we can, even if it's virtual, have you all up here, and a special focus on the upper watershed and the headwaters this year. We're also thrilled today to have Congressman Antonio Delgado joining us. Congressman Delgado represents New York's 19th Congressional District. For those of you who know the state of New York and are familiar with the congressional district layout, you know that Congressman Delgado has a huge district. It actually extends to points north of Albany, down that other river that we're not talking about today, the Hudson River, and over south of Poughkeepsie, and then it just spreads west towards Middletown, New York, then up here to Hancock, New York, where I'm sitting. It encompasses the entire Catskill Park of New York State, and it spreads northward even beyond Oneonta and towards Utica. So it's a giant district, and we really commend the congressman because he spends a lot of time in our neighborhood. We've got to know him well. He's been a great champion for the Upper Delaware River, despite the fact that he has a lot of water in his district. We see him often over here. Our coalition partners are very familiar with him. Myself and former FUDR Chairman Dan Plummer, who I think is on the call today, had the privilege of actually standing next to the congressman when he made the first cast, the fly fishing season up here last year in the Beaverkill River, which is a tradition, a long-standing tradition. And there was the congressman dressed in waders and throwing that fly rod and looking like he had practice actually before he arrived. So that was a fun day for us. So Congressman, I think you're on the phone. We have about a half an hour here. I'd like to have you just make some opening statements, if you would, and then for a few minutes, and then we'll dive into kind of a informal town hall kind of session, a chat between you and I'll get a chance to ask you some important questions about the Upper Delaware River. And then we'd like to just talk a little bit about the federal grant program that's administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and all the resources that has brought to the Upper Delaware River over the past 3 years. And then hopefully we will also have time to field some questions from the audience, which Sandra, I'm hoping that Kelly and Olivia will facilitate for us at that point. So with that, welcome Congressman Delgado. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to see you, even if it has to be virtually. When you reference the fly fishing in the Beaverkill, it certainly brought back a lot of memories, and that was a wonderful day. Personal pronouns, he, him, his, and I just want to say, first and foremost, good morning. It is good to be with all of you at the 8th Annual Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed Forum. Excited to join my good friend Jeff for this important discussion about the watershed and our work in Congress to protect and support this incredibly important natural resource. Also want to thank Sandra and Eric for all of the effort and everyone's effort who worked incredibly hard to put this event together, this virtual conference. I look forward to when we can all get together again in person and congregate in our surrounding communities. Before we move on into a nice conversation with myself and Jeff, I did want to share just a couple of remarks. The Delaware River is the lifeblood of our communities, fueling our economies, bringing close to $400 million of value in our region every year, creating jobs, providing for our watershed areas in New York, as well as the 4 states that rely on the river. And protecting the Delaware River has been a personal focus on mine during my first term in Congress. Most recently, on May 5th, I joined several CDRW coalition partners and public servants from across the district to announce the 14 new road signs, as Sandra spoke about earlier, designating that you are now in the Delaware River Watershed. Just an amazing development that I was proud to be a part of. In October of last year, in addition to speaking at the Water Everywhere conference, I also had the pleasure of joining this same group to announce nearly $1.3 million in federal funds recently awarded to the Friends of the Upper Delaware River and Trout Unlimited as part of the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. These funds allow FUDR and TU to conserve and restore fish and wildlife habitat, enhance and maintain water quality, improve river-based recreation opportunities, and public access in the Upper Delaware watershed. Right now, federal support for the watershed couldn't be more important, more vital. As state and local governments confront enormous budget deficits, our communities are being asked to do more with less. We cannot allow Congress to lose sight of supporting the Delaware River watershed and its value to our region. And so I'm here to tell you, as long as I have anything to do with it, Congress will not lose sight of this tremendous asset and to our community and all its value. So with that, I will conclude my remarks, and I'm happy to begin the conversation with Jeff.
Great, thank you, Congressman. I just got a couple questions for you that we thought about a little bit earlier to build on the comments that you just made about the importance of the federal program and what's going on in the U.S. Congress now. I mean, obviously, we have challenges on multiple fronts here, and yet the coalition is proud to announce today that the federal appropriations for the Delaware River program continue to go in the right direction. It's a positive trajectory. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the atmosphere on Capitol Hill these days and how you see that impacting environmental programs generally and the Delaware River program specifically in the coming years?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was very proud to join with my colleagues in voting for the appropriations legislation that included the $9.7 million in fiscal year 2020 for the Delaware River Basin restoration program. I'm working with my colleagues to make sure we can get the full $10 million in 2021. You know, in this environment, in this climate, any fight for increase in fundings in any space is going to be a challenge. The pandemic has really stretched us in every way possible. I know that we have a lot of focus right now on the next stimulus bill, and that's going to take a lot of focus and attention. But I will tell you that, you know, and as we've heard already, you know, given the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, I do think that there's a growing appetite on a bipartisan basis to do the work of conservation, do the work of protecting our public lands. You know, a lot of money out of that act that would go towards improving our trails, campgrounds, roads, other park infrastructure. So the good news for me is that we're building some momentum in this space, despite all that is going on. And, you know, as Eric spoke about, you know, I do think that what COVID-19 has done is, I think, given people the realization to some degree, or at least the desire to want to get out, you know, and breathe some fresh air, take advantage of all of our natural resources when it's possible. And so, you know, I think we can continue to build upon this in the months and years ahead. And this is certainly going to be a focus of mine as we move forward. So yes, there's an appetite. We have a lot to deal with right now in Congress, but I do think that there are some positive signals for what lies ahead.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. Both Sandra and Eric talked about environmental justice issues. And in my opinion, the way where we see that the most in the upper watershed is from an economic perspective. And I know that you have visited this area many, many times. I see your face all the time in the local newspapers. You're visiting farms and you're visiting local businesses and you're visiting local officials. So sort of bringing it back down to the local level here in your district in the upper Delaware River, how do you see the issue of environmental justice and economic challenges that we have here playing into the larger context of our efforts to protect and restore the river?
Well, I'll say there's no doubt that there are elements to the question of environmental justice that speak to the disproportionate effect that the location of certain facilities that might pollute or impact the quality of air and water, no doubt can have an impact along racial lines. And that's certainly something that we in Congress have to make sure we address. But I would also note that more broadly, there's a connection between empowering and protecting and conserving the value of our land and our environment in a way that can bring about real economic justice, real economic growth, and job opportunities. And as you know, my focus is always, more or less district specific. And I'm thinking about the ways in which, our environment, our natural resources can lend a hand in protecting and growing our regional economies, which of course inures to the benefit of everyone. So for example, I was in Sullivan County at the Catskills Visitors Association. I got to meet with a bunch of folks in the county there who, like most of the region out west, is depending on tourism and people coming to our areas and the foot traffic to get the experience of going outdoors, whether it's the fly fishing or the hikes in the mountains, whatever the case might be. And again, with COVID-19 being what it is, we're seeing a real impact on that. To put things in perspective, okay, Sullivan County is one of the most, if not the most, tourism-dependent county in all of New York. And then if you look at the numbers from 2019 compared to 2020, Sullivan boasted a 9% private growth rate in 2019. And now it has lost 11.8% of its private sector jobs. And this is all tied to tourism. It's all tied to how people are willing and able, or if they're willing and able to come to our area to embrace and celebrate its beauty and take advantage of our natural resources. So maintaining the integrity of our environment, protecting it, enabling it to grow and sustain itself is not just grounded in our moral desires to respect the earth and our climate, but there's an economic imperative as well that I think can really speak to some of these environmental justice issues. Not in totality. I think there are some discrete issues that will have to be addressed as well. But I think a critical piece to that will have to be making sure that we see that there's economic value in making sure that we protect our environment, conserve it, and enable it to grow for the benefit of all of our communities.
Great, thank you, Congressman. My final two questions are kind of linked together. This whole coalition is about pulling people and communities together on a watershed-wide basis. And so, of course, that includes the states of New York and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And I'm wondering and hoping that as you do your work on Capitol Hill, that you're seeing the connectivity here around the Delaware River watershed among your congressional colleagues. Is there, do you have increasing opportunities to have conversations about the importance of the Delaware River on a watershed-wide basis? So you might be talking to the congressman from the state of Delaware, and hopefully we're seeing that sort of coming together. And then my good friend Meg McGuire is on the call, I noticed, from Delaware Currents, and she's been patiently waiting for about a year to ask this question. She asked you last year, and when you came to the Village of Deposit to do our press conference about the awards we received from the federal Delaware River program. We don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have a congressional Delaware River caucus. There's been some discussion about that. So related to this idea of, are we all working together? We certainly are as a coalition, and we hope that there's a spirit on Capitol Hill for that as well. And I know Meg's question has been, she's talked to me a lot about it. Is there, do we have the kernels of a formation of a Delaware River Congressional Caucus? And if so, is that something you're interested in and could help provide a leadership role in?
Yes, this is I'll deal with that second question first. I've been asked that question a few times, and I remember it was a rainy day when that question was first asked. And I said then, and I'll say now that I see real value in that. We looked in, I didn't even know at the time the question was asked if there was in fact a caucus. And I believe I said that I was going to, figure out if there was one. If there wasn't, we try to figure out how to start one. And I remain committed to doing that. Obviously, a lot has happened, over the preceding months. But it is a focus. And I do think that, if I'm fortunate enough to return for a second term, is one of those things that I really want to circle back with my colleagues. To your question, I've had great discussions and cooperation, coordination, particularly with the reps up or down in Pennsylvania, Brendan Boyle, Brian Fitzpatrick. We've joined on letters, and particularly around appropriations in terms of funding the Delaware River watershed. And so this is an area where I've been able to build relationships across the political spectrum based on these shared interests. And I think from that standpoint, we do have an opportunity to grow and work together. I mean, this is going to be an issue for us for the foreseeable future. The impact of climate, what it is doing to our natural resources, how we can utilize this problem or tackle this problem in a collaborative, bipartisan way that is grounded in situational dynamics. And the more that we can build consensus and cooperation based on shared realities on the ground, the better we'll be for it. And so, yes, I am all for taking some steps to develop the Delaware River Caucus. And while we move forward and deal with the dynamics of COVID-19 for the remainder of this year and potentially into next year, there are a lot of things on the plate to handle, but this is certainly one thing that I have not forgotten about and certainly appreciate, the focus on it as we move forward.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for those thoughtful comments. And rest assured that this coalition is completely prepared to support all of those efforts. Just reach out and ask us, and we'll be there for that. So before we get into the question and answer, I just want to let you know that you mentioned the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program a few moments ago, and I want to just let you know that Friends of the Upper Delaware River and our coalition partners up here recently received an award from that program to do a number of projects in your district, and we hope that the projects include things like improving aquatic habitat, mitigating the devastating impacts of flooding, protecting public infrastructure, developing enhanced recreational opportunities in the watershed. You mentioned tourism. We're all about that in terms of how we're using these funds and resources to improve our recreational attributes up here, and beyond just the fly fishing, but also boating and hiking and bird watching, and even and all of those things lead to second home investment, which comes right back to the importance of economy in the river up here. So we just wanted to let you know that for the third year in a row, we did receive an award for those types of projects, and in no small part due to your advocacy in Washington for that program. And we just want to reach out and say thank you very much for that.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Certainly will continue to do all I can to assist in securing funding. Like I said, I understand the value of the work that you all do. And thanks for sharing.
Sure, great. So at this point, I think Olivia and Sandra, we're at the point in the presentation where the audience is free to ask some questions of the Congressman. I don't know if we have any in the queue or not.
Yeah, Jeff. So My name is Olivia Lawarn. I'm the engagement coordinator with the coalition, and we have a question from Eric Stiles from New Jersey Audubon for Congressman Delgado. And he asked, how can we, both as coalition, as the general coalition and coalition members, continue to support leaders like Congressman Delgado to move forward a shared Delaware River watershed agenda?
Well, I mean, I think the work that you all do on the ground, that is collaborative in nature, that is cooperative, that identifies, where there's common ground to grow and build from. And of course, that keeps the pressure. And I think pressure, sometimes, you don't hear everybody talk about pressure, particularly elected officials, but pressure is a good thing. When folks on the ground put pressure on the system, when you put pressure on the electeds, when you are in their ear, it matters. The old saying, squeaky wheel gets, what is it saying? Squeaky wheel gets something about the squeaky wheel. Point is that squeaky wheel will get heard. If you're not, and if you're quiet, you're not going to get heard. So make sure that you, stay engaged, be strategic, and there's power in numbers. And so the more you can build upon your coalition, the more you can bring allies into the fold, the better off you will be in terms of then utilizing that power and pressing on the pressure points where you can leverage it and hopefully get what you desire. And of course, identify people, and I like to include myself among them, who are allies, who want to do that work for you and on your behalf, and can deliver, when it comes to the outcomes that we all desire.
Great, thank you. I have another question here from Kristen Zilkowski. She asks, what are some good ways for our members to be in touch with you and other members of Congress while we can't get together in person due to COVID?
Yes, letters obviously are big. Phone calls to the office. We have a lot of access points, be it through phones, through email, through letters, and we try to be very responsive. And I would hope all of my colleagues take the same approach. We don't ever let our correspondence get below 90%, and nothing past 2 weeks in terms of response time. So, I think the more and more congressional offices take that approach and stay on top of their correspondence, which isn't easy, but I think it's vital. I think the better off we'll be, and you should expect that. You should expect that from your representation, that they should be responsive to your inquiries and follow up. By the way, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That is what I was trying to say.
Great, thank you for that. Just reminding folks that you can submit your questions in the chat directly to me, and I will ask Congressman Delgado. So I'll give folks a couple seconds to continue getting your thoughts together.
Congressman, while we wait for additional questions, you can't escape the issue of climate change, right? You hear about it all the time, and we worry about that, and we wonder what your thoughts are on climate change, how we can address that at the federal level, what we can do here locally. We're interested to hear what's the latest discussion on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, no, it's such an important question, and I think it's going to be with us, for years and years and years to come. We have to really, first and foremost, collectively on a bipartisan basis, own the reality. When you see what's happening and the frequency of the extreme weather events. I mean, people talk about the wildfires, for example, out west. It's a fact that climate change did not cause the wildfires, and we should all understand that. But it's also a fact that the droughts and the heat is creating the conditions that have made the wildfires way worse than they would have otherwise been. And so it's accepting the state of facts and understanding that there is a scientific component to this that we have to orient ourselves around and first and foremost accept as the objective truth. Otherwise, we can't have a conversation in a way that can resolve the issue. And then, you look at whether it's the impact out in the West or the flooding, the hurricanes, the hail seasons, every part of the country is grappling with its own set of issues that can be tied to climate change. And here in our part of the state, we're talking to farmers who are dealing with inclement weather, who are dealing with the impact on the health of the soil, also factoring in the increased realities around Lyme, particularly out in the Hudson Valley. But this is a real issue for us that is tied to climate change as well. We have got to tackle it. And part of tackling it means focusing on the source of the problem. And the science has made it clear that carbon emissions are what contribute and what cause climate change. And so unless we're prepared to deal with that reality and transition away from a fossil fuel economy to a clean energy, renewably sourced economy, then we're going to be in the place that we currently are. And I think it's incumbent upon the federal government to make that transition as seamless as possible and also as effective and as efficient as possible, but also understanding that we can help people understand that there's great economic opportunity in making that transition. There's a lot of growth in all of these areas, and you can see in other parts of the world who are spending millions upon billions of dollars investing in these technologies, investing in these clean energy sources, because it's the future. And that's where job growth lies. Last point I'll make, I'm trying to lead on this area. I introduced the Green Jobs and Opportunity Act, which would create a set of pilot programs that would funnel resources into our community colleges, into our high schools, into our middle schools even, to train young people for the jobs that we need to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That to me is gotta be a focus. How do we build out the pipeline, if you will, of opportunities to make sure that we have the workforce needed to meet the goals the IPCC has set if we want to make sure that we can reverse the trends here and the impact that we're experiencing due to climate change.
And I have another question here from Peter Marks. He asks, depending on the results of this year's election, how do you recommend we try to get funding for the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program in the President's full year 2020 budget request? Or 2022, oopsie.
Well, I would say you just got to, every administration is going to have a different set of priorities. But the good news is that there's a trend here in the right direction when it comes to funding the restoration program. And I think, particularly if I'm back, I'm certainly going to do my part in making sure that this is a priority. And I think it will be. One of the things that we don't talk a lot about, at least at the federal level, and I don't think we talk enough about at the national level when it comes to discussion about climate is, conservation and what it means to conserve and what it means to protect, what we have in terms of the environment. How you cultivate, how you sustain it, the means through which you do so, are all part of a mentality, of a culture of care that I think is important if we're really going to tackle climate change holistically. So it's a mindset too, and it's an approach. And I think, I like to think that that's the one area where even if there might be some partisanship along the question of climate, conservation and protecting and securing our natural resources, to me is a growing area of bipartisanship, even in the midst of some divisiveness on the question of climate change more broadly. So I think there's an opportunity, irrespective of, which administration we have in 2020, that we can continue to double down on this work and grow and find common ground. Now that to me is what I try to do from my vantage point, is always be laser focused on where there is common ground and to build from there.
Wonderful. And that actually dovetails nicely with another question that we had from Tally MacArthur. asking, it's not difficult to communicate and make your points to those who generally agree with you. So can you share lessons, experiences, and approaches to effectively communicating with or convincing those across the aisle with those with values maybe different than yours, although equally as valid as one own?
I love that question. That's a great question. And it's such an important question in today's climate, where there's so much incentivization around polarization, and whether it's the echo chambers that are created with social media and Google searches that you can read that reinforce your own point of view, whether it's the cable news networks, you know, and whether it's even our educational system, which I think in many respects is no longer really teaching our young people the distinction between fact and opinion. And so all of this has compounded the situation to the point where it's become increasingly harder to find that common ground and talk with individuals who you might disagree with, and do so in an agreeable fashion. But one of the benefits of representing a district like mine, where you have a third of the folks independent, a third Republican, a third Democrat, in a district that Trump won, you know, is I have to figure out all the time, you know, where to find that common ground, how to, you know, have a meeting of the minds, if you will. And I'll tell you, the biggest piece to all this is to listen. You know, a lot of people hear things, but they don't really listen. When you're in a conversation with somebody, sometimes you just want to think about what it is you want to say, rather than actually listening to their words and what they're trying to communicate to you. There's a point. They're talking to you for a reason. And it's important for you to actually listen for what that reason is. And then while you're listening for what that reason is, then you could begin to figure out, okay, where is there some commonality between what I'm hearing in this person's expression and what I believe? Or how can I at least help them understand by how I respond to them that I get what they're saying first and foremost? Don't just rush to what your counterpoint might be. People want to understand that you actually got what they're first trying to say, even if you disagree. And so it's important that you have patience. Patience is a very important skill and value. And to be humble. It's very important to be humble and to put your ego aside, and to make yourself vulnerable even at times, to understand that you know, you're not going to get everything you want out of that conversation. But if the goal is to find some common ground, you got to humble yourself in those moments and actively listen. And more often than not, when you do that, when you actually do that, there is common ground. More often than not, you can find that space. Even if you disagree vehemently in other areas, and I've had those discussions with constituents, people who vehemently disagree with me in multitudes of areas, but we're able to zero in on, okay, well, here's an area though where we can build together and grow together. And that's enough sometimes to say, let's work together. And that's what you got to do. You can't go in expecting everybody to just agree with you on every issue wholeheartedly. And at the same time, celebrate diversity. That doesn't make any sense. If you want to celebrate diversity, then you got to celebrate everybody's point of view to some degree, or at least give it a chance to breathe.
Thank you. I have a question here from Grant LaRouche from the National Wildlife Federation. He asks, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed has long advocated for a transparent process to manage water quantity issues in the upper Delaware. Can you give your thoughts on the relationship with New York City and if it's meeting the needs of the upper Delaware in reference to the water quantity?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, but I think the question had to do with the water supply and the management of the reservoirs and the impact that it's having. And when I actually was out in Grahamsville, you know, at the center where the water systems are managed, and had conversations, they made it clear, you know, from my vantage point, that the priorities have to be balanced here. Obviously, we have a lot of folks downstate who are relying on clean water and want to make sure that they can have that. We're talking millions of people. So, but at the same time, there's a tremendous burden, you know, in the northern part of the state, upper state, well, let's just say north of the city anyway, that, you know, we have to carry in making sure that in the most natural way possible, we're able to provide that water. And that requires both a constant attending to our environment and also the management of these reservoirs. And there are times where at least from what I've heard from people in the district, where though those needs are economic needs here locally, sometimes are taking a back seat to what people might think could happen downstate, as opposed to what is happening in the Catskills in our area. So I do agree. We need more transparency in that regard. I've made it a point in talking with folks who are in this space that this is a concern of mine based on what I'm hearing from folks on the ground, and definitely want to continue to figure out how to manage this system and work to get a more transparent process in place.
Thank you. And then I have another question here from Nathan Boone from the William Penn Foundation. He asks, as we think about how green jobs programs can advance our shared goals for watershed restoration and engaging with a more racially diverse constituency, are there any programs or models that you're particularly excited about, and how can we make the best use of this opportunity?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think one of the things that we can do is, as we develop and model our programs, where we know there's potential for economic growth, we have different sets of dynamics that we can marry that I think can help. So you look at even the concept of opportunity zones, which were part of the 2017 tax bill, which were more about incentivizing private actors to invest in communities with the hopes that there'd be more growth economically in those traditionally depressed and underserved communities. There's a way in which that concept more broadly could be used to layer on top of communities that have been negatively impacted by the environment, by their proximity to pollutants, for example, whether it's a manufacturing plant, or whether it's plastic manufacturing plant, or whether it's next to a waterway that has been impacted or polluted. There's ways in which we can layer zones of acute injustice. And then as we at the same time develop the training programs that I spoke about with my pilot program, the Green Jobs Bill, we can direct resources and funding to those areas in a way that can account for that disproportionate reality. And so I think as long as we are very targeted in terms of where these impacts are, and we have the funding to make sure that we're investing in those communities through these educational opportunities, there's a way in which we can begin to remediate some of the environmental impact that has been compounded by the racial overlay as well. So there's a way in which we can do that work, but all of this requires a vision. It requires prioritization. And I think that's something that more than anything we have to accept across the country. What are our priorities? Looking out 10, 15, 20 years from now, what are the objectives here? I think that this is an area where we can really rally around as a country from the environmental standpoint and from the harsh realities that climate change is bringing about. And it's not going anywhere. This is not a problem we can just wish away. It's only going to worsen unless we do something about it.
Thank you. And that was our last audience submitted question, but as the chat's turned off, Congressman Delgado, you can't see a lot of the people complimenting you directly to my chat. So we appreciate the really fantastic answers that you've been given. I believe now I'm going to toss it over to Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, Olivia. Thank you so much, Congressman Delgado. Really appreciate it and all
Thank you.
time you're able to spend with us. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you all for having me. Always a pleasure. I love the work that you all are doing. Please consider me an ally and an advocate. All the best in your endeavors. Jeff, always a pleasure to see you. And stay healthy and stay safe, and God bless. Take care.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman. All right, folks. So that's our first session. Thanks so much for joining us. A reminder that our next session will begin in a half hour at 11:30. We are going to leave this Zoom room open. If you would like to connect with other attendees, we can do that by placing you into a private breakout room. And with any others on the call, just message Amy in the chat box, Amy Schofield in the chat box. Another reminder, Sketch, which I sent you all that link this morning for Sketch. We have everything that you'll need on that platform, all of the Zoom links, absolutely everything, speakers, descriptions. I also sent out a PDF for those who rather look at it via PDF versus Sketch. We've recently added some field trips late last week, so feel free to take a look and reach out to any of us, Amy, me, Olivia, if you have any issue whatsoever and or have trouble accessing the links throughout the day. Hopefully all is smooth sailing, right? So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day and hope to see you a little later on at 11:30. So thanks.
Right, the time has come. So welcome to the lightning rounds and next steps for the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program session. My name is Olivia Lawarn. I'm with the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And I have just a few housekeeping notes for everyone before we get started. So this session is being recorded and will be shared to the CDRW website sometime next week. And I'm gonna have all attendees be muted. So if you'd like to indicate that you'd like to speak, you can use the raise hand button in the participants tab of Zoom, or you can directly chat me or chat into the everyone chat. If you have any technical difficulties, please directly message me in the chat and I will do my best to help you out. And the rest of the forum schedule can be viewed on sketch.com. I'll include this link in the chat for folks as well if they need it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Slattery and he'll take it away.
Thanks, Olivia, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund Lightning Round presentations. As was said, my name is Mike Slattery and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Delaware Watershed Partnership Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Session this morning is backed by popular demand. You all gave it some really strong reviews last year, so we thought we would do it again. And I think most everyone participating today likely knows about the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, but just in case, it's the signature competitive grant program made possible by congressional funding, and it's meant to inspire federal, state, and regional and local partners to not only envision a sustainable future for people and wildlife in the Delaware River watershed, it's also intended to help us work together to identify, prioritize, and implement projects to move us all in that direction. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service administers the fund in cooperation with our partners at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We certainly could not do it without them at all. I'd like to specifically thank Rachel Dawson, Claire Flynn, and Aaron Lewis, whose work on behalf of the grant program has been absolutely nothing short of heroic. The slate of grant awards for this year was announced on Wednesday, September 9th. Grants were awarded to 37 partners across the watershed, and they'll use a total of $8 million that was made available. And that's combined with an astounding $22 million in matching funds to enhance water quality, improve water management, conserve wildlife habitat, and add to outdoor recreational access across the region. 3 years into the grant program, we have tremendous momentum, and together with the grantees from 2018 and 2019, the new cohort from 2020 will contribute to a cumulative total of 80 miles of restored streams, almost 900 acres of restored wetlands, nearly 4,700 acres with new or improved public access, 323 new jobs, and a lot more. And these aren't just a collection of random acts of conservation either. All of the projects are conceived within a shared strategic framework developed by watershed partners. And because of that, they add up to long-term conservation benefits for human and natural communities that are significantly greater than the sum of their parts. And though we always need to keep the big picture in mind, there's also tremendous inherent value in each and every individual project. Each grant and each of the projects the grants support reflects collective effort to address the most important environmental needs of communities where they count the most. On farms and in forests, in suburban backyards, in urban neighborhoods, along local streams and in coastal marshes, where the people who live and work in these places care enough about them to want to do something about it, where they come together to save and restore what makes the region special, not just for their own sakes, but for the benefit of generations to come. So let's hear from some of the people who care so very deeply, shall we? Let's hear directly from some of our recent grantees about the really important work they're doing. I first met Jen Adkins of the Christina Conservancy more than 10 years ago, and I was immediately impressed with her ability to organize and motivate others around a shared purpose. All of us here today count on the work of local watershed organizations to improve environmental and social conditions in our backyards. And in turn, those organizations depend upon effective people like Jen to coordinate and inspire their work. So Jen, thanks for being here today to share about your work. I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, great. Thank you, Mike. It's great being here. Great to see people, even if it's only on screen. And as Mike said, I'm Jen Adkins. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm here on behalf of the Christina Conservancy, but I'm also on the staff of American Rivers. I'm the new director for clean water supply in the Mid-Atlantic. And the Conservancy, though, is my local watershed organization. It's based in Wilmington, and it's devoted to promoting, preserving, restoring, appreciation of the historic and natural resources of the Christina River and its watershed. And although that watershed includes some very well-known rivers like the Brandywine and the wild and scenic White Clay, the main stem of the Christina is sort of known as the Forgotten River. It cuts across northern Delaware from Maryland, just south of Newark, through Cooch's Bridge, and east to Wilmington, where it joins the Brandywine and flows into the Delaware River. And the Christina Conservancy is actually the only organization focusing on that main stem of the river. And we are thrilled to be among the recently announced awardees to receive funds from the Delaware River Conservation Fund for a project that we affectionately called CBR4. And that's for the Lower Christina and Brandywine River Remediation, Restoration, and Resilience project. This is a collaboration between nonprofit, government, and for-profit entities that started with the Christina Conservancy, the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, which is DNREC, Bright Fields Incorporated, Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, and Sarver Ecological. But we've had input, and we're going to be working with many, many others on the project itself, including Delaware Nature Society, the City of Wilmington, the Riverfront Development Corporation, and some other local groups here in Wilmington, doing planning here in Wilmington. So the awarded funds will be used to develop a cohesive vision, strategies, and hands-on projects, importantly, for addressing contamination and restoring fish and wildlife habitat in and around these rivers in a holistic way. And it really builds on the success of, one, the Clean Water Act, but also all of the successful Wilmington riverfront redevelopment efforts over the years, as well as all of the work that's been done to clean up debris and pollution from these lands and waters. So for almost 30 years, the Conservancy has worked with DNREC and others on the Christina watershed cleanup and has removed over 400 tons of trash. At the same time, DNREC's WATAR program, which is a remediation program, has worked with the city and the Riverfront Development Corporation to make major strides to clean up the contaminated land around the river. So this plan is the path to take us the rest of the way, really, including addressing contaminants in the river itself and a new level of river stewardship that combines cleanup and redevelopment with restoration and resilience. So community experts, including local residents and volunteers, will be invited to give input on this process, as well as the technical experts who are partners who will take the lead on gathering data about the river's health. And the total investment over 3 years is anticipated to be over $770,000, thanks to resources being provided by DNREC, as well as the Conservancy and other sources in addition to the grant itself. So it was about a year ago this month that DNREC and Bright Fields hosted a workshop on the riverfront here in Wilmington, taking stock of all the various work that has been going on, including at the time some new work by the Conservancy funding bathymetry, a bathymetric study of the river itself, and a lot of work by DNREC that was looking at fish populations and species data that they had collected over time. And a group of us got together afterwards and realized that the recovery of the river's health after hundreds of years of pollution and contamination was actually within reach. I mean, it's still going to take some time, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel here, and that no one was really looking at the river itself and its habitat potential, partially because at one point in time, the pollution issues were so bad that just wasn't where the attention was. So That's what really inspired us to work on this project together, and we're so excited that the Delaware River Conservation Fund is going to be making that possible. So if you'd like to learn more about it, I would invite you to please take a look at the Christina Conservancy's website, which is christinaconservancy.org.
Thank you, Jen. We're really pleased to be part of the work and supporting such, excellent advances in the Christina. So thanks for all that you're doing. The priorities that state fish and wildlife agencies share beyond the boundaries of individual states are central to the concept of interconnected networks of habitat, and that allows cherished fish and wildlife species to thrive throughout the entire watershed. Our next presenter, Rob Hossler, represents the Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife, and I've been privileged to know and work with Rob for well over a decade as well. During that time, he's distinguished himself as a champion of multi-state objectives that can only be achieved through collective action and impact. We're fortunate to have Rob's voice and presence advocating for strategic, scalable conservation action that transcends those parochial geopolitical boundaries. So, Rob, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Rob Hossler. I guess my pronouns would be he and him. What I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the 1,000-acre marsh restoration project. It's a project where we're trying to restore water management back to a very large wetland complex. A little history of me. When I first came to Delaware some 28 years ago, I cut my teeth on wetland restoration. I did a lot of wetland restoration projects in both on the Christina River and the northern stretch of the Delaware River. And this is a project that got away from me. I never was able to accomplish it as a manager, but now as administrator, I'm glad that I can finally get around to do it. Little background, 1,000-acre marsh is a 1,280-acre wetlands complex. It's the largest freshwater wetland complex in the state of Delaware. In 1978, it was identified as an outstanding natural resource area in Delaware. And at that time, it was only owned by private landowners. Since then, we have slowly, especially associated with the pressures of development in that area, have acquired about, or soon to hopefully acquire about 25% of that wetland complex soon that will be owned by the state of Delaware as a state wildlife areas. So importance of this wetland complex, primarily for waterfowl, wading birds that use Peapatch Island, which is a nationally recognized important wading bird colony, and fur use, and to lesser extent, some fish use. The problem with this wetland complex is the water control structure that was built in the 1950s only really allowed one-way flow of water out of the marsh. Since then, that structure has started to degrade to the point now where it's allowing tidal exchange, unimpeded tidal exchange, uncontrolled, and we're starting to change from emergent wetland complex to an open water habitat. So the landowners have approached us as being now a larger landowner, and the structure is actually owned by the transportation, our DELDOT, our State Transportation Authority, and they saw the problems that have actually increased in the last 10 years. So they actually got some legislative money to do to start looking into the project, kind of like seed money. And then DELDOT approached us about whether, about replacing the structure. Although, like I said, I was excited that we were finally tackling this project. What I'm most excited about is the fact that this is one of the few, I could probably count on one hand or maybe two hands, of the times where it was almost seamless, the relationship between two state agencies and also federal funding to get a project off the ground. This is a great example of that. DELDOT approached us and says, look, we're looking to replace the water control structure. We said, rather than replacing it with the exact same thing that you used to have there, which was one-way flap gates. So in essence, we were managing water level in that impoundment with, I'll say, a sledgehammer. Could we add some features that allow us to, especially with increased sea level rise and increased salinity, that we can manage this impoundment more surgical? So we went from a sledgehammer to hopefully someday in the very near future to a scalpel. Worked out great. DELDOT was going to use all state money. We were looking to partner with them. there was an opportunity with the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund to bring in federal match to match their state money. So for a project that is going to be now about $1.8 million, we have a 50-50 relationship between DelDOT and DNREC, using almost 50% of that will be federal money, primarily money from the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. And so this came together perfectly. Like I said, I don't know how often, and it came together very fast. That's the thing I like about it the best. It wasn't something we were working on for years. So it's up and running. Our other federal aid will be through our Pittman-Robertson Fund. Again, they'll be using all state highway funds. And so the fix now is the structure had 3 one-way flap gates. For those of you who aren't familiar, they only allow water out of the marsh. We are going to replace one of those gates with a gate that we can actually lift up. So if there was low salinity conditions in the Delaware River and we wanted to bring water into the marsh, we can, as opposed to, we used to chain these heavy flap gates up, which I will tell you, I did it with DelDOT's assistance. It's unsafe. It also was probably not best for the water control structure. On the inland side, we used to manage it with just simple boards. And so you have people doing wet work in boots with water moving, which is probably not the safest scenario. And now we'll have automated weirs that we can use an actuator and actually lift and lower the water control structure from the top of the road. So it's a great fit for us. We think we'll be able to manage this marsh much better than we ever could. In terms of the timeline, just had a meeting Friday with DelDOT and the private landowners. We think we'll put the project out for bid as early as January, February of 2021, so in less than 6 months. And we hope to have construction in August. We do have a seasonal time restriction that we have placed on the project ourselves, which means we can't do construction because of LOCIDs until August. So we hope to actually put a cofferdam in August and have construction and hopefully be done by November. So with that, that's kind of a summary.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it. That's a ambitious project, and I know it's an important one, not just for the resources, but for the agency, for you, and kind of a crowning achievement on a very illustrious career. So I'm really happy that we're able to be a part of it and support it.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is a man in high demand. His job managing John Hines National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum, which is the nation's first urban wildlife refuge, is a 24/7 gig. There's no doubt about that. And one of the things that means is that I don't get to spend nearly the time that I would like to working directly with Lamar Gore one-on-one, and that's my loss, but it's a small price to pay for the comfort of knowing that he's out there doing the work that he does for the wildlife and people of the watershed, especially in urban communities that have held the short end of the stick for far too long. I do get to work with Lamar some, though, and it's enough to make me exceedingly proud that he's part of my own agency. So without further ado, here's Lamar Gore.
Good morning. My name is Lamar Gore. Thanks, Mike. I wrote this thing up as kind of a fun conversation, but everybody's getting all detailed. Let's go.
Make it fun.
Yes, yes. So imagine an alliance of 23 conservation partners along a waterway, aligned to connect with a more inclusive constituency in our communities to a natural world through recreation, education, and community action. With a backing of an organization that has a vision for a greener, cleaner, and a drinkable waterway. We all want that, right? When you throw that, together, that mixture together, that's what the Alliance for Watershed Education, is. And any alliance, we've made a clear point to engage a new audience, who we have across the conservation world really left out of our intentional efforts, left out of the conservation conversation across the ages. It seems so simple for us to think about that, to recognize that that's there, but we haven't really made a scratch at trying to fix it. There's efforts on it. And there's a model that we can follow. This project is going to adopt what some of you may know as the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program in the Fish and Wildlife Service. We will begin to implement principles from the Standards of Excellence, which if you've seen it, it outlines 8 important standards which help us to engage urban communities. And the effort will help us to adopt and fold in a more community-focused, intentional, inclusive, and collaborative effort in working with communities to accomplish conservation. Well, so what? Well, what is, we know how to reach our historical audience. We all know how to do that. We know how to reach them. Do we reach all of them? No, but we do know how to reach them. Because we have comfortably worked with them for many years. But with our more culturally and ethnically diverse audiences, we've been losing ground in the area of relevancy for the conservation work that we're trying to do, because we have not purposefully engaged. We haven't been as intentional as I think we all know we should. So my example is this. Imagine that you're heading out on a date where you want the impression of who you are, your integrity, your intentions to be of the highest standard. I don't know but there's no one on this call who wants to not hit that mark. The Standards of Excellence uses that idea. And I say that because the standards, there's 8 standards, but there's one standard that stands above all. And that's, how do we truly know our audience at an intimate level? Not just, oh yeah, I know the audience. I know kind of what they like, what they want to do, but how do you truly know your audience? Only by knowing your audience at a deeper level, intimate level, can we, as one, make progress that we know that we're looking for to have successful conservation. And that brings me to what this project is going to be focusing on. And I'm going to give you the 30,000 foot level on this. And it's that we're going to train within the Alliance, and we're going to take 8 centers to start with to better engage excluded communities, or what I like to call systematically excluded communities. These are communities that we don't think about going out to engage with, because clearly we engage with those folks that are already interested in what we do. They run in our circles, they're in our friends groups, they work with us, we hang out with them in clubs, etc. We need to do that work in neighborhoods, develop programs that create enriching experiences for these communities, and communicate the success of our work across the Alliance and beyond. And that's a hard part for us, because as conservationists and scientists, as biologists, we suck at communicating. We just do. And I put myself in that category too. I've had to learn along the way to get there, but if we can't communicate on the level in which the community can receive it, it's going to fly right by. In the Alliance, we've realized that in order to have, well, we can't have any meaningful success in our work without that true engagement that deepens the connections between the new communities and their needs. So that's the important thing. In our world, in our conservation world, we want to put money in and get the metrics out within a year or 2 years. And that's really hard to do when you're now talking about engaging an audience that we've left out. So the work begins with understanding the need. And in our work, we will focus very heavily on that knowing part. And it's trying to find out, what does community really need? What do they care about? And a lot of the conversations that you have in communities have been left out. And these are typically a lot of environmental justice communities. They've been left out, and they're thinking about things like clean water, clean air. Are the neighborhoods clean? Are people in the neighborhood in danger of getting killed on the street for one reason or another? Do they have safe places for their kids to play? Our question is always, how do we take what we do in the conservation world, mesh that with the things that we can pluck off of that list and create something that connects them to conservation? But not only do that, when the connection is built, then take it and turn it into conservation action that grows out of the community into the areas where we typically focus. That's the work that we're up to. If you want to hear more about and learn more about what the Alliance for Watershed Education is up to, This is, I'm just going to paste the link right in the chat. And I'll tell you, you will find, I think we have it posted on the website, you will find an inclusion statement on the website. I believe is there. If it's not there, someone send me a note and I'll send an email to Mike and he can share it out. The inclusion statement clearly lays out the importance of engaging an audience that's been left out of the conversation. This is a work that for most of my, about half of my career now, I did not think it was that important. I did not want to focus on connecting with people and reaching into people's lives and trying to find connections. That's there now. And it's a mistake that I've made over my years. But that's gone because I've seen the only way that we make success is by bringing everyone along. And that's what the alliance is focused on now.
Wow. Thanks, Lamar. This is really such timely work, and yet it's so long overdue, right? I applaud you, and just want to say that again, that we're exceedingly proud and grateful to be in a position where we can help support that work. So thank you for your leadership on it very much. New Jersey Audubon is one of our nation's oldest independent Audubon organizations. It was founded in 1897, and the name invokes authority, expertise, trust, admiration, and conservation circles around the world. And we're fortunate enough to have them located right here in our watershed. We're even more fortunate to benefit from the technical assistance, community organizing, and project management capabilities of skilled members of their team like Kristen Meistrel. As you are about to learn, there is so much about their work, and specifically Kristen's contributions to it, for which we can all be very grateful. Kristen, you're up.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike mentioned, New Jersey Audubon, we are a statewide nonprofit conservation organization. I'm the Stewardship Project Director in Southern New Jersey, and we are pleased to have received actually 2 awards through the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, both focused on Southern New Jersey. So we're going all the way to the bottom of the watershed here. The first project that we were awarded focuses on restoring at least 100 acres of Atlantic white cedar on private lands in the Marsh River and Rancocas Creek watersheds, which covers much of Southern New Jersey and the southern portion of the Delaware River Basin. Atlantic white cedar wetlands are considered to be a globally rare plant community, but one that is of ecological, economic, cultural, and historic significance. Atlantic white cedar wetlands support several rare and imperiled plant and wildlife species, some that are found almost exclusively in the New Jersey pine barrens. And these wetlands also work to improve water quality, mitigate flooding, and also act as a natural fire break, which is necessary but often occurrence in the New Jersey pine barrens. And across much of Atlantic white cedar's range on the East Coast, this plant community has experienced a severe decline. And in New Jersey, it fell from an estimated 115,000 acres to pre-settlement time to around 40,000 acres remaining in the state. But despite all of this, Southern New Jersey has some of the largest remaining natural Atlantic white cedar populations throughout its range. And so New Jersey Audubon is working to reverse this trend and to protect and conserve these wetlands. And so we are excited to be working with our partners, some of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, private foresters, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service to provide both technical and financial assistance to private landowners in those watersheds who are looking to restore Atlantic white cedar on their properties. This project is also set to coincide with a similar effort that the state of New Jersey is working on to restore Atlantic white cedar on state lands. And so really this work is going to help fill in the gaps and connect the dots between the restoration efforts on state land and really expand upon all of that work on private lands, which is so critically important in New Jersey, especially since roughly 2/3 of our landmass is privately owned. And then the second grant that we receive is all the way at the bottom of the watershed, and that's focused on the Cape May Peninsula. which is a really important site along the Atlantic Flyway and is also considered a globally significant important bird area, primarily because of the stopover habitat it provides for migrating wildlife. And also coinciding with that, Cape May County has a really rich agricultural heritage, features a variety of different crops, including lima beans and strawberries. So every year, Cape May has a lima bean and strawberry festival among several other festivals that features different crops. And so because of this ecological, agricultural, and cultural importance that this area has, New Jersey Audubon and our Cape May Bird Observatory have worked in this area for several decades. And so through this program, we are looking to bring to life our mission of connecting people with nature while also restoring at least 100 acres of critical habitat. We're going to do this by offering some really unique and innovative programming that will not only restore the habitat on working lands in Cape May County, but also offer a really unique recreational experience. So bringing a new experience through some natural history programs and workshops that will occur right at the restoration site. So opening up these private farms for natural history programs, bird walks, bio blitzes, and things like that. So some of the restoration will include agricultural best management practices, invasive plant management, and wildlife habitat restoration. But we're also looking to offer nature walks, bio blitzes on those private farms, and then we'll also be hosting a speaker series where we'll highlight some of the landowners that are participating in the work. They can talk a little bit about their experience, about their history, about why they're doing what they're doing. And we're really excited that these programs will provide a new way for New Jersey Audubon members and volunteers, and also members of the public, to really connect with nature, to get to experience new recreational opportunities on these private farms that they wouldn't normally be able to have, and then see habitat restoration in action.
Wow, thanks, Kristen. It's really great stuff. I'm looking forward to following the progress of these projects as they unfold. Noah's really excited to read the proposals, and thanks again for all the work that you're doing there. It's a great organization. Okay, local actions to restore environmental conditions that benefit the people living and working nearby are really where the rubber meets the road, right? They're where the relevance of our grants to the people of the watershed is most apparent. So it's appropriate that we now turn to another local watershed organization, the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, to back cleanup for these lightning rounds. All the local watershed organizations in the Delaware River Basin play really important roles in their own rights, but not all watershed organizations have the sophistication or capacity to undertake projects at scales that are both inherently beneficial at the site scale and also can contribute to a bigger vision of connectedness. So as you'll see and hear, Brandywine Red Clay Alliance does have what it takes under the capable leadership of Jim Jordan. Jim, thanks for being here with us today to share about your work. You're up.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for that introduction, and a special thank you to all my peers. BRC is humbled to be awarded this grant because we know it's a very competitive round, and we're also pleased to see money coming to the Delaware River Watershed. I think we've sat back, and we all love the Chesapeake Bay, but we've sat back and watched a lot of money go into that watershed, and myself, along with our partners, we have a lot of great projects. It's difficult to get funding for. So a special thank you to the Delaware River Conservation Fund and to National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So our project that we're doing is unique for our organization. We do a lot of stream restoration work, and we've been around for a long time. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, and we have these grandiose plans, and the pandemic kind of shut up a lot of those plans down. But we were founded in the midst of, right between Victory in Japan Day and Victory in Europe Day, 3 days before the German U-boat surrendered on the coast of Cape Penelope. So we've been around for a long time. We've weathered some storms, and And we're excited to be able to continue our work under somewhat different conditions. But project we got funded is removal of a dam. So as you all know, the Brandywine is probably one of the most historic streams in the country. And I call it a stream. A lot of people call it a river, and Jerry Kaufman and I constantly have that debate. But we're going to remove the Lenape dam structure located in Pocopson Township. It's a 280-foot long low head dam. It's already partially breached. The benefits are multifold. The project will restore 3,300 foot of section of stream to free-flowing condition. And that 3,300 feet of stream now is pretty much devoid of aquatic life, of fish because of poor habitat, slow water behind that dam. So not only will it restore habitat for fish that are recreational species currently there, like smallmouth bass and muskie, and to a lesser extent trout that are stocked by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and various other private clubs. But it will also provide a pathway for andromorous fish species like the American shad, which this country was founded on. We've all read the story about George Washington and his troops living off of those American shad during the Revolutionary War. So we hope to restore that fishery to the Brandywine for American white shad and hickory shad and river herring. And this is part of a bigger effort, Shad 2020, which is headquartered in Delaware, which Brandywine Red Clay is part of, along with a lot of other organizations. Goal is to remove 11 dams. Now, not all 11 dams can be removed. Some of them are historic by nature. Some of them can't be accessed. But what we want to do is either remove those dams or provide fish passageways for these migrating fish species. So this is only the second dam in 85 years that has come down in Chester County along the Brandywine. So we're excited about that. And something us folks in the conservation field don't usually get involved with, and that is safety. And there is a real significant safety issue with this. 3 years ago, 2 kayakers drowned at this low head dam. It's very dangerous. You can't see the dam when the water is at mid-level and even during low water conditions. So 2 people drowned there 3 years ago. And just this past July, when National Fish and Wildlife Foundation was gone over our grants, 3 other kayakers had to be rescued there. And I swear we didn't plan that or stage it, but we had 3 people that had to be rescued. So this opens up a huge stretch of the Brandywine to not only anglers, but to kayakers and boaters where they can participate safely. And we all know if we're going to continue our work and if it's going to continue to be relevant, it's important to get people outdoors and interested in outdoor sports. Other thing that's kind of unique about this, we all want landowners to contribute to projects when it's on their property. That's not always the case. This dam is owned by the Lenape Cabin Club, and they actually matched the NIFWF grant dollar for dollar. So we have enough funding to do this with BRC's contribution. We have the engineering study done. So in all intents and purposes, it is shovel ready. So we plan on going out to bid in the next few weeks on this project, and we want to have this dam removed by the end of the calendar year. So that's an exciting thing. A lot of projects take years to plan and to get funding for. This is happening very quickly. So we're excited about that, excited for this dam to come down and open up this 3,300 feet of the Brandywine to recreation. So thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Jim. This concludes the lightning round presentations, and I want to thank our presenters again for sharing their work with us today. Jen, Rob, Lamar, Kristen, and Jim, thank you very much. I really appreciate your participation, your presentations, and especially the great work that you do, and I'm sure that the audience does as well. Before I move on to our next topic, I do also want to acknowledge that as great as all of the projects that we are funding are, and as worthy of celebration as they are, we also know that there are still entrenched barriers that prevent some of the communities from benefiting from the positive ripple effects of these projects. Barriers exist that prevent those communities from participating in conversations about protecting the natural resources right where they live in their very own communities. So that's why increasingly investments from the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund will focus on work to break down those barriers, both within the conservation organizations that we work with and in the projects they support. You know, as we heard from Lamar, this year's cohort includes initiatives to foster equity, justice, and cultural competency across a network of watershed communities. These projects are an important beginning for us to make, but there's still much more that we can do, really, that we need to do to help address racial and economic disparities in access to nature. So in addition to the Alliance for Watershed Education project, there are several other projects that I want to draw your attention to that reflect our commitment to breaking down those barriers. The projects, some projects make space for residents to shape what that should mean and should look like and should feel like for them. So I'll encourage you to visit a link for the entire grant slate and learn more about these other projects. At some point, I'll put it up in the chat so that everybody has direct access to that link. And while you're at it, you can check out the summaries of all the other projects being funded this year too. We've been able to highlight just a few this morning, but they're all really great projects and worth reading about. I think you'll be impressed by all of them for sure. And then one last thought, I want to add my thanks to the long list of those expressing gratitude for the leadership and support that Sandra and Olivia and Amy have brought to the forum, and also for the generosity of the forum sponsors, especially the William Penn Foundation. So thank you very much for your leadership and support. It's a terrific event every year, and we're very happy to be part of it again this year. I think, Olivia, we are ready to go on to the next topic, right? There we are, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce the topic of the Delaware River Watershed Conservation Collaborative. That is the name for the Conservation Action Partnership that is taking shape to help fulfill all of the provisions of the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act, which is about more than just operating a successful grant program, although the grant program is certainly the centerpiece of the partnership. In addition to establishing the grant program, other provisions of the Act, which is now codified as federal law, require the Director of the Fish and Wildlife Service to coordinate with federal, state, local, and regional entities and conservation partners in order to plan and implement conservation strategies in the basin in several ways. It identifies the need for an established program partnership to identify shared priorities and goals among stakeholders in the watershed and to accelerate the conservation work to achieve those goals together. An organized, coordinated partnership to guide the evolution of this work is really needed in my estimation. We've worked over the last 3 years to fulfill the provisions of the law, but there have been several instances where we've struggled a bit without having a legitimate deliberative body to turn to when facing critical decisions about the nature and direction of the work. Our work and decisions are supposed to be guided by and reflect the collective wishes of partners and stakeholders. And we're certainly not making decisions over the last 3 years in a vacuum. We work hard to reach out and get feedback from everybody that we should be reaching out to, but we really need a more formal and consistent representative group to truly legitimize the decisions we're making on behalf of the watershed partners. So if you could go to the next slide, Olivia. Thank you. Last November, we convened a large number of partners and stakeholders right at Heinz Refuge in Philadelphia to take stock of our efforts to implement these various provisions of the law. We took that opportunity to gather input and inform the 2020 grant program, But we also discussed the need for a structured and operational partnership to stay focused on making progress. And the consensus out of that workshop at the gathering was that a small group should be brought together to begin framing structure and governance options for such a partnership. And as you're about to see, we now have draft foundational documents to support the partnership, and I'll present them here today to solicit broader feedback from all of you. You'll hear how to go about that just a little bit further in this presentation. If you could advance the slide, please. A big part of the discussion that we had about convening that small group and beginning the process of developing governance and structure options centered on distinguishing the role of this partnership, the partnership that arises from the Act, from that role that's already being successfully fulfilled by the coalition. And throughout the process since last fall that we've undertaken with that group, we've continued to see a need to distinguish and clarify the different complementary roles of the two organizations. It's a very important distinction. The coalition's role, as you know, is to provide advocacy and communication to enhance the 150 plus nonprofit and environmental member organizations' capacity to effectively advocate for protecting and restoring the Delaware River Basin. And the coalition and their membership have been main advocates for the funding that we receive from Congress. So these are extremely important functions that they fulfill, and we don't intend to duplicate that. The role of the collaborative, on the other hand, will be to provide a forum and a framework for aligned strategic conservation action. We will work to harness the collective potential of all the partners to move the needle together on conservation goals and priorities that we decide upon together. So we'll create a holistic strategy for conservation work throughout the entire basin, and then work with our partners to implement that strategy by engaging with groups that have similar interests in the watershed. The collaborative provides structure and a space to share resources and achieve this shared vision. So they're two pretty different but related and complementary sets of work. And an important additional note I should make here as well is that we are adamant about integrating the structures and functions of all the existing effective partnerships that are already doing work in the watershed. We want to integrate that kind of thing rather than creating new process and bureaucracy through the collaborative. Lord knows we all have enough of that in our work lives. So our aim here is to build from the success of what already exists and to integrate it and integrate what's being done and connect it in new ways to efficiently achieve collective impact. If you would advance the slide. Thank you. So what's been done so far? Right after we gathered together back last November, Sandra Meola and the coalition agreed to help facilitate and coordinate the work of an ad hoc group, the small group that I mentioned. Thank you, Sandra, for the assistance. We really desperately needed it, and I can't thank you enough for stepping up at a time when it was most necessary. The team itself consisted of Dave Golden from the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, Kathy Klein at the Partnership for the Delaware River Estuary, Steve Tambini at the Delaware River Basin Commission, and Beth Brown at Pennsylvania Audubon. Thanks to all of you for the very heavy lifting you've done over the past weeks and months, and a special thanks to Christina Ryder, my friend and colleague, without whom I would truly be lost. Christina was instrumental throughout this whole process, keeping things on track, keeping me on track so that we get these drafts in sufficient shape and present them to you today for further review and comment. Over the course of the last several months, we've reviewed and revised these documents several times to get them in shape for broader circulation. And it's included a couple rounds of vetting with state agency leaders and leaders at other federal agencies, as well as some opinion leaders from a few prominent NGO partners too. And now we think they're well enough developed, these documents, to receive some constructive review from you, our broader audience. Next slide, please. So I'll note a couple high points, some things that came up repeatedly during the course of this process. First is there was concern expressed about the size of a steering committee. We're going to have a steering committee to help guide this partnership, this collaborative as it begins to operate. The steering committee, and we agree with this, needs to be lean enough to be able to operate efficiently, yet it really should be fully inclusive of the broad range of perspectives shaping restoration and conservation work in the watershed today. We don't want to continue to contribute to systematically disenfranchised communities that Lamar was speaking about. We want to help on that issue. So it needs to be inclusive enough and yet still be lean enough to operate efficiently. And the second concern that was raised is that, well, it wasn't really a concern, it was more interest, a general interest in how we intend to address that commitment to foster an inclusive and equitable steering committee makeup and culture. But it created a challenge to us, and honestly a little bit of tension at times, because there are 4 states and there are multiple environmental or fish and wildlife agencies in each of the states. You know, there are numerous federal agencies that are named in the act itself, and many other conservation partner organizations all have an interest in participating. So how do we keep it lean enough and yet create you know, a structure and a function that enables the kind of inclusivity and diversity that we want? So what we've done, and you know, when you take a chance to review the documents, you'll see what we've done, is devise an arrangement of representative sectors, if you will, state perspectives, federal perspectives, nonprofit and diversity perspectives, and coupled that with an annual evaluation to ensure that the process and participation is fair and equitable to shape and influence an inclusive collaborative. And the structure of the collaborative is multi-layered too, and I'll explain that further when I get to the next slide. But there are other levels that will enable those wishing to participate, where partners can engage, and in some instances they may even find that it's a better fit than participating regularly in the steering committee, depending upon an organization's specific interest or expertise. So as I said, we're sincerely, strongly committed to a diverse and inclusive partnership culture, both in terms of the structure and the function. And we think that comes through in these documents, but please let us know what you think about how we have attempted to address this challenge hits at that. And if you have ideas how we can approach it in a better, more efficient way, please share them with us. Advance the slide, please. So I mentioned that there are multiple levels at which partners may wish to engage. This graphic here is truly just a conceptual model. It's not anything cast in stone by any stretch of the imagination. It's a model for a partnership structure, for a structure for the collaborative. It's conceptual really because it's not appropriate to have it decided prior to impaneling the steering committee. The actual structure will be discussed and determined through a consensus process once the steering committee is in place. But this graphic conveys the concept well, I think. You know, you can see that we have the steering committee up there, but there are going to be work groups and technical committees and advisory committees. And you know, we have some categories here that seem elemental to us, and we think will likely be included, but again, that remains to be seen. And then there's the place for the coordinating body. You know, the steering committee will likely be populated with those in a more executive level, and we don't expect them to do the day-to-day work to tee up issues and develop the work products on behalf of the partnership. So we know that there's going to be a need for a coordinating body of some sort, and likely, especially in the early phases of the collaborative, that will be done through us, through the Fish and Wildlife Service, and any of the partners that have already and will likely continue to be directly engaged. But we're going to need to tee up decisions for the committee. We're going to need a coordinating function there. So that's what that represents. And you know, as you can see from the slide here, there are places for local government voices to be heard and citizen voices to be heard. We certainly have a category in place there for science and data advice and technical assistance. Again, this is just conceptual, but we hope that it gives you the idea. We aim to seat the steering committee by January of 2021. Next slide, please. So 2021, where do we go from here? Now is the time for any of you who are so inclined to review the documents and provide feedback. You'll find the documents at the link that is shown here at the top. You can provide feedback there directly through that link as well. The link is hosted on the Coalition's website. If you go to the link, you'll see instructions at the bottom of the page where it's circled here, how to get the documents and provide your comments. Or if you are more comfortable giving feedback verbally or via email, you can do that too. Contact information will be provided here as part of this presentation and as part of the materials from the forum. We will be receiving feedback on our documents through October 16th, so about a month, and we'll incorporate it following that into a final draft set of proposed documents by December. Our aim is to assemble a steering committee, as I said, for the first time in January, and there are a couple of reasons why January is important. First, this is a true collaborative partnership, and finalizing version 1.0 of the foundational documents for it isn't just up to us at the Fish and Wildlife Service, as I mentioned. It's a collective decision, and it should arise from a consensus of a steering committee, and we have to put them in place in order to finalize version 1.0 of these documents. And we want to get that nailed down as soon as possible. Truly, formalizing and structuring this partnership is long overdue. The second reason January makes sense is to convene the steering committee meeting is that the next RFP for the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund is scheduled to come out in February of next year. So if we convene the steering committee in January, we have the added benefit of being able to solicit some advice and get some of their preferences about what should be targeted with the funding. It would give us time to hone the RFP then based on the input we receive from the steering committee. Next slide, please. So here's the contact information for myself, for Christina, for Sandra, if you prefer to provide feedback directly to us rather than through the link we provided. And just to stress again, I referred to this as version 1.0, hopefully being approved by the steering committee in January. And I just want to be very clear that the collaborative as a partnership needs to be nimble and adaptive. So these foundational documents will remain living documents, and they'll be subject to periodic evaluation and adjustments so we can be sure they continue to serve our needs as well as possible. So next slide, please. That is all from me for now about that and the process that we undertook to get those documents in fighting shape. I think we have a few minutes for questions if there are any from the audience. And I'll turn it back over to Olivia.
Great, thank you for that, Mike. And I can put the contact information from the slide deck for everyone in the chat as well. I saw some folks were taking photos of it, but if you'd rather copy and paste, I can do that. So we do have just a couple of minutes for questions. So if folks want to drop those in the chat, please feel free to do so, and I will ask them. Sandra's putting her email up.
That's great. They're holding their fire until they get a chance to look at the documents.
So everyone's contact information is in there.
Well, that's great. Well, we're waiting, and maybe folks are truly holding their fire until they have a chance to review the documents, which is great. I want to encourage people again to, we think we've done a pretty thorough job, but we could not have thought of everything. So I really want to encourage you to provide your thoughts and feedback to us. So.
Looks as though we have a question from Dana Pattison for you, Mike. She asks, will there be a role for the private sector in this collaborative?
Yes, we expect so. We're not sure exactly, how in the draft framework we provided of the structure that will arise, but we clearly recognize the need to include industry, particularly resource-based industries, but other industries and non-traditional partners as well, and clearly want to make sure that that we're progressive and on that front as a collaborative, and we have a history of doing so in other landscape scale partnerships that the Fish and Wildlife Service helped to facilitate across the country. So we are anticipating that, and any specific feedback about how that might fit into these documents or to our process or to the framework structure, please provide that to us, and we will take all of that into consideration and hopefully do a really good job finding the right fit for industry voices in the process. Yeah.
And another question for you is, what was the range of the 2020 grant awards?
What was the range in terms of dollar amount?
They didn't specify, but that's how I interpreted it.
It was $50,000 to $500,000.
And then one last.
And they were scattered all over the watershed, and at the link you'll be able to see where the projects are located for all 3 years actually too. Yeah.
And then one last question before we close. Someone asked, will non-governmental organizations be able to lead committees, or will that be in the wheelhouse of the government organizations?
Oh no, we do not want this to be a federal partnership. This is a true collaborative, and we are counting on nonprofits to help lead work efforts as a structured, formal part of this collaborative.
Awesome. Well, for any other folks who still have questions but want to stew on them a little more, as I said, everyone's contact information is in the chat, so jot that down, and of course, leave your comments following the link to the webpage on CDRW's website. But I want to thank Mike and all of the awardees for giving a rundown of their projects and for joining the session. Right.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Olivia.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, Lamar. See you, Matt.
Thank you, everyone.
See you all at the breakouts.
Yes, breakouts are at 1 p.m. Woo.
Thanks, see ya.